On a crisp September day in 1940, pomp and circumstance abounded in the generally quiet backwoods of the North Carolina-Tennessee border, as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt officially dedicated the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to the American people. He spoke of the collective ownership that these lands hold, the place of nature in the American psyche, and perhaps more ominously, the necessity of wilderness to keep Americans from growing soft, foreshadowing Americans' coming involvement in the Second World War. We are at last definitely engaged in the task of conserving the bounties of nature, thinking in the terms of the whole of nature. We are trying at least to attain employment for all who would work and can work and provide a greater assurance of security throughout the life of the family. It may seem odd that so much attention was given to the dedication of one park, but the creation of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park would detail an increasing focus towards conservation on America's East Coast, rather than just the western half of the country. It shouldn't be a surprise that these mountains have a history that stretched back long before it was turned into a park. The area had been inhabited by Cherokee groups for thousands of years, far longer than any European communities who did not show up in the area until the close of the 18th century. At this period in time, the national parks of the West were well established. Yellowstone had been founded during the 1870s. National parks were primarily thought of as a West Coast phenomena, associated with the high mountains, rolling plains, and deep canyons of that part of the country. In the wake of extensive logging in the area, conservationists began to talk about bucking the West Coast trend and creating a national park on the East Coast. The mountains of the southern Appalachian Range were being clear-cut and in increasing danger of being industrialized out of existence.
North Carolina and Tennessee politicians saw the economic benefits such a park would bring and began campaigning to bring a national park to the Great Smokies. At the same time, park supporters were also aware of the need to tout the beauty of the Smokies landscape to gain the national recognition necessary to pass a park bill in Congress. Numerous articles appeared in local and national outlets describing the beauty of the mountains and the sacred nature evidenced by that beauty. The trouble was, the National Park Service did not have the money necessary to establish a park. That is, until the timely intervention of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., and of longtime residents in the area, who offered up money and land to the Park Service. In 1934, the park would be formally chartered, but it would take more than a slip of paper to create the park. That would require the manpower and involvement of the CCC. In 1929, the stock market crashed, leading to the infamous Great Depression. At first, the response from the government was largely passive, with an assumption that the free market, in its divine wisdom, would fix the problem. With the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the presidency, the federal government would take a more active role in combating unemployment through job creation programs. The CCC, or Civilian Conservation Corps, was one such program. Founded in 1933, this program employed young men in the area to plant trees, create trails, and participate in firefighting. 23 CCC camps were constructed across the park, and workers built hundreds of miles of road, campsites, as well as the Rockefeller Monument at Newfound Gap. The CCC, in many respects, built the park, and the ruins of their handiwork still exist today. In order for the CCC to begin work, the government first had to gather enough land to create the park. The governments of North Carolina and Tennessee enacted eminent domain laws that allowed them to claim the land within the park and force out the squatters that remained in the park. And as Dr. Dan Pierce, an expert on the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, states, many left under stressful circumstances.
There are a lot of people living in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park when it became a national park, or when Congress designated that if the states would purchase this land, that it would become a national park. And the National Park Service made the decision that, well, we don't have people living inside of national parks. They had problems in other parks where they had allowed what they called in-holdings of people, and they caused a lot of problems. There were, on both sides, in both Tennessee and North Carolina, you had individuals who fought these in the courts. Most of the people sold because they didn't have the wherewithal to hire lawyers and fight this and go into court and be successful against the government, essentially. And so a lot of people sold pretty quickly, but there were some people, most notable John Oliver in Cades Cove and Mark Hanna and Catalucci, that took this to the respective state Supreme Courts and ended up losing.
Understanding the benefits such a park held, North Carolina benefited economically from the tourism the park generated but also through the recognition of having a national park within its own state lines. The presence of the CCC in the park also meant that thousands of young Tar Heel men were able to work during the Great Depression. By preserving the land that made the Great Smokies today, North Carolina made its name as a progressive state that saw the potential the conservation of this land would have down the road.
I know there's bluegrass in heaven, and there's where I want to make my home.